In 1990, the IRS seized almost everything Waylon Jennings owned: his gold records, his tour bus, even his Grammy Awards. The outlaw country legend who fought Nashville's system his entire career was nearly destroyed by a different system: the IRS. This is the story of how one of country music's biggest stars lost millions and had to start over from scratch. Waylon Jennings wasn't born into wealth or privilege. Growing up in Littlefield, Texas during the Great Depression, he learned the value of hard work and determination early on. By age 12, he was already working as a DJ at a local radio station, and by 18, he was playing bass for Buddy Holly. In February 1959, fate intervened in a way that would haunt Waylon forever. He gave up his seat on a small plane to the Big Bopper, a decision that saved his life when that plane crashed, killing Holly, the Big Bopper, and Ritchie Valens. This brush with death gave Waylon a new perspective. Life was short, and he was going to live it on his own terms. When Waylon arrived in Nashville in the mid-1960s, country music was dominated by the Nashville sound. Polished, orchestrated productions that felt a million miles away from the raw honesty of traditional country. The industry executives wanted to mold Waylon into their image of what a country star should be, but he refused to compromise. By the mid-1970s, Waylon, along with Willie Nelson, Tom Paul Glaser, and others, had sparked what became known as the outlaw movement. Their 1976 album, Wanted the Outlaws, became country music's first platinum record, proving that authenticity could sell better than conformity. Money started pouring in. Hit songs like Good-Hearted Woman, Luckenbach, Texas, and Mamas Don't Let Your Babies Grow Up to Cowboys dominated the charts. Waylon was selling out venues across America, and the royalty checks were bigger than he'd ever imagined possible. But while Waylon was revolutionizing country music, he wasn't paying attention to his finances. Like many artists, he focused on the creative side and left the business details to others. It was a decision that would eventually cost him everything. What Waylon didn't realize was that behind the scenes, a financial storm was brewing, one that would eventually sweep away almost everything he had worked for. The road to Waylon's financial disaster wasn't paved with extravagance or reckless spending. Instead, it was built on something far more mundane: poor accounting and misplaced trust. Throughout the late 1970s and 1980s, Waylon's career was at its peak. Money was flowing in from multiple directions: record sales, touring, merchandise, and publishing rights. But managing the finances of a superstar is complex, requiring meticulous record-keeping and tax planning. Waylon had entrusted his business affairs to managers who promised to handle everything. "I was on the road 300 days a year," Waylon later explained. "I figured they were taking care of business while I was taking care of the music." The critical mistake came down to how his income was classified. His business manager had set up a system where much of Waylon's income was being reported as loans rather than earnings. This accounting method temporarily reduced his tax burden, but it created a ticking time bomb. Year after year, these loans accumulated on the books. The IRS eventually caught wind of this arrangement and determined that these weren't legitimate loans at all. They were income that should have been taxed. And now they wanted their money, with interest and penalties. By 1990, the bill had grown to a staggering $2 million, equivalent to about $4.5 million in today's money. When Waylon finally learned the full extent of the problem, he was shocked. He had always believed he was paying his fair share of taxes. "I thought everything was being handled," Waylon later told reporters. "I never tried to cheat anybody out of anything. I've always tried to be honest." But the IRS wasn't interested in intentions. They wanted payment, and they were prepared to take drastic measures to get it. For Waylon, the nightmare was just beginning, and what happened next would shake the country music world to its core. On that fateful November morning in 1990, Waylon Jennings was at home when several black government vehicles pulled up to his estate. IRS agents, armed with legal documents, had come to collect on his $2 million tax debt. The scene that unfolded was something out of a movie. Mountains methodically went through Waylon's home, tagging items for seizure: gold records that represented his life's work, the Grammy Awards that validated his artistic vision, personal items that held memories of his journey from Texas to superstardom. "They took everything but my underwear," Waylon later joked, though the pain behind the humor was evident. and they would have taken that too if it had been worth anything. The agents seized his recording studio equipment, his tour bus, his motorcycles, and even the rights to some of his recordings. For a man who had built his career on independence and control, this was the ultimate humiliation. Jessie Coulter, Waylon's wife and musical partner, recalled the day with heartbreaking clarity. It was like watching someone dismantle our life piece by piece. These weren't just possessions. They were pieces of Waylon's soul. The news spread quickly through Nashville. The outlaw who had defied the music industry establishment was now facing a different kind of authority, one that couldn't be charmed or outmaneuvered with a clever song. What made the situation even more painful was that many of the items seized had value far beyond their monetary worth. The platinum records, the handwritten lyrics, the custom guitars. These were artifacts of country music history. As the agents loaded up trucks with Waylon's possessions, he stood watching, stoic but devastated. The man who had once sung "I've Always Been Crazy" was now facing the crazy reality that everything he had worked for was being taken away. But even in this darkest moment, Waylon's friends were already plotting a way to help the outlaw get back what was rightfully his. The IRS scheduled a public auction of Waylon's possessions for January 1991. The event drew attention from across the country, with fans, collectors, and curiosity seekers all planning to attend. For the IRS, it was simply a means to recover unpaid taxes. For Waylon, it was the public dismantling of his legacy. What the IRS didn't anticipate was the loyalty of Waylon's friends in the country music community. Behind the scenes, a plan was taking shape, one that would turn the auction into an act of solidarity rather than humiliation. When the auction day arrived, familiar faces began appearing in the crowd. Willie Nelson was there, having recently faced his own $16.7 million tax battle with the IRS. Johnny Cash arrived, his imposing presence drawing attention. Chris Christopherson, Tom Paul Glazer, and other members of the outlaw country movement showed up in support. But they weren't just there to offer moral support. They had come with a purpose. As the bidding began, a pattern emerged. Waylon's friends were strategically bidding on his most personal items, not to keep them, but to return them to their rightful owner. They had pooled their resources to ensure that Waylon's most treasured possessions wouldn't end up in the hands of strangers. Johnny Cash successfully bid on several of Waylon's guitars, including a rare 1950s Telecaster that Waylon had used on many of his classic recordings. Willie Nelson purchased Waylon's first set of platinum records. Jessie Coulter, working through representatives, bought back many of their personal items. "We weren't going to let Waylon lose everything," Willie Nelson later explained. "That's not how we treat our brothers in this business." The auction raised significant funds for the IRS, but thanks to the coordinated efforts of his friends, many of Waylon's most precious possessions eventually made their way back to him. It was a powerful demonstration of the bonds that united the outlaw country movement, not just in music, but in life's hardest moments. Yet despite this act of solidarity, Waylon still faced the daunting task of rebuilding his life and career from the ground up. In the wake of the IRS seizure, Waylon and Jessie were forced to downsize dramatically. They moved from their sprawling estate to a modest apartment, trading luxury for simplicity almost overnight. "We went from 10,000 square feet to 1,000, Jessie recalled. "But you know what? There was something freeing about it. All that stuff, it was just stuff." Waylon approached this dramatic change with characteristic resilience. Rather than wallowing in self-pity, he found a certain liberation in starting over. "I've been poor before," he told friends. "I know how to do poor. It's the rich part I never quite figured out." The financial reality was harsh. Waylon still owed a substantial amount to the IRS even after the auction. At 53 years old, an age when many artists are winding down their careers, he needed to find a way to generate significant income quickly. The situation forced Waylon to reevaluate his priorities. The material trappings of success, the mansions, the luxury cars, the extravagant lifestyle, suddenly seemed less important than the things that truly mattered: his music, his family, and his freedom to create on his own terms. This period of reflection led to some of the most honest conversations Waylon had ever had with himself. He confronted his past excesses, not just financially but personally. The years of hard living, the cocaine addiction he had battled in the 1970s and early 1980s, the relentless touring, all of it had taken a toll. "Maybe this is the universe telling me to slow down and take stock," he confided to Willie Nelson during this period. Despite the hardships, Waylon's sense of humor remained intact. He began introducing songs at concerts with quips about his situation. "Here's a song the IRS hasn't gotten yet," or "I wrote this one, but the government owns it now." The country music audience, far from abandoning Waylon in his time of trouble, embraced him even more. There was something quintessentially American about his struggle, a man facing adversity with dignity and determination, refusing to be defined by his mistakes. But Waylon knew that goodwill alone wouldn't pay his debt. He needed a plan, a way to turn his misfortune into an opportunity for redemption. Waylon Jennings had always been at his best when backed into a corner. Now facing the biggest financial challenge of his life, he turned to what he knew best: making music. In 1991, he approached RCA Records with a unique proposal. He wanted to create an album specifically designed to help pay off his IRS debt. The result was Waylon: His Personal Journey, a collection that included new recordings of some of his biggest hits, along with narration where Waylon shared stories from his life and career. The album was marketed directly to his fans through television commercials, an innovative approach at the time. The commercials featured Waylon speaking candidly about his tax troubles. "I've had some problems with the IRS and I need to raise some money. This album is special to me and I hope it will be to you too." This direct appeal to his audience worked. The album sold over 300,000 copies, generating significant revenue toward his tax debt. Fans appreciated both his honesty about his situation and the opportunity to help an artist who had given them so much through his music. Waylon also increased his touring schedule, sometimes playing smaller venues than he was accustomed to. Every dollar counted, and he was determined to honor his obligations. "I never considered bankruptcy," Waylon later explained. "I made this mess, and I was going to clean it up." This period of financial recovery coincided with a creative renaissance. The pressure seemed to focus Waylon's artistic vision. His performances took on a new intensity, and critics noted that his voice had never sounded better. There was a raw authenticity to his music now, the sound of a man who had truly lived the hardships he sang about. By '93, Waylon had made significant progress in paying down his tax debt. The IRS, recognizing his good faith efforts, worked out a payment plan for the remaining amount. The worst was behind him. Through it all, Waylon maintained the outlaw spirit that had defined his career. He hadn't compromised his artistic integrity to solve his financial problems. Instead, he doubled down on what made him special: his connection with his audience and his unflinching honesty. But he hadn't made this journey alone. Throughout his ordeal, one friend in particular had been by his side, offering both moral support and practical advice from someone who'd walked a similar path. If anyone could understand what Waylon was going through, it was Willie Nelson. In 1990, just as Waylon's tax troubles were becoming public, Willie was in the midst of his own battle with the IRS, facing an even more staggering bill of $16.7 million. The two friends, who had revolutionized country music together with their outlaw movement, now found themselves united by a different kind of rebellion against the tax authorities that threatened their livelihoods. Willie had taken a creative approach to his own tax problems. In 1991, he released the IRS tapes, "Who'll Buy My Memories," an acoustic album sold directly to fans to help pay his debt. He even turned his financial disaster into humor, famously joking, "What's the difference between an IRS agent and a buzzard? The buzzard waits until you're dead to pick your bones." Drawing from his own experience, Willie became Waylon's most trusted advisor during this difficult period. Their late-night phone calls often stretched for hours, with Willie offering both practical advice and the emotional support that only a true friend could provide. "Willie told me to keep my head up and keep making music," Waylon recalled. He said, "They can take your stuff, but they can't take your talent." Beyond moral support, Willie also helped in tangible ways. He invited Waylon to join him on tour, ensuring his friend had income when he needed it most. The two performed their classic duets like "Mamas Don't Let Your Babies Grow Up to Be Cowboys" and "Good-Hearted Woman" to enthusiastic crowds, proving that their appeal remained undiminished despite their financial troubles. In a gesture that particularly touched Waylon, Willie organized a benefit concert in 1992, with proceeds going toward Waylon's tax debt. Kris Kristofferson, Johnny Cash, and other friends joined the lineup, turning what could have been a humiliating situation into a celebration of friendship and solidarity. The support Waylon received from Willie and others in the country music community reinforced something he had always believed, that the bonds formed through music were stronger than any hardship life could throw at them. As both men gradually worked their way out of their respective tax problems, their friendship deepened. They had always been musical partners, but now they were brothers in adversity, sharing a unique experience that few could understand. Their parallel journeys through tax hell became part of country music folklore, another chapter in the outlaw saga that had defined their careers. By the mid-1990s, Waylon had largely resolved his tax issues. The ordeal had lasted nearly 5 years, consuming his energy and resources. But as he emerged from the financial darkness, it became clear that the experience had profoundly changed him. "I don't regret what happened," Waylon told a reporter in 1995. "It taught me what matters and what doesn't. And most things, it turns out, don't matter much at all." The tax crisis had stripped away the artifice of stardom, forcing Waylon to reconnect with the simple truths that had inspired him to make music in the first place. His post-IRS recordings reflected this renewed perspective, featuring some of the most introspective and authentic work of his career. In '96, he joined forces with Johnny Cash, Willie Nelson, and Kris Kristofferson to form the supergroup The Highwaymen, creating music that reflected the wisdom and perspective of men who had seen it all and survived to tell the tale. Waylon became more careful with his business affairs, taking an active role in managing his finances rather than delegating everything to others. He often advised younger artists to pay attention to the business side of music, a lesson he had learned the hard way. The experience also deepened his already strong connection with his fans. They had stood by him during his darkest days, buying his music specifically to help him pay his debts. Waylon never forgot this loyalty, often expressing gratitude in interviews and on stage. Perhaps most importantly, the tax ordeal reinforced Waylon's core identity as an outlaw, not just in his musical style, but in his approach to life's challenges. He had faced down the system once again, this time not the Nashville establishment, but the federal government, and had emerged on his own terms. When Waylon passed away in 2002 at age 64, the obituaries mentioned his tax troubles as just one chapter in a remarkable life. What they emphasized instead was his revolutionary impact on country music, his unwavering artistic integrity, and his authentic voice. Today, Waylon's legacy transcends his financial difficulties. He is remembered not for what he lost, but for what he created. Music that changed the course of country history and inspired generations of artists to follow their own path, regardless of the consequences. The man who once lost everything except his talent and determination proved that those two things were all he really needed. In the end, that may be the most outlaw lesson of all.